And now suddenly what happens if a $200 Claude code subscription turns out to be $1,000 or even $5,000 a month? Is one thing getting your CFO to approve a $200 subscription license for all your developers. It's another thing if it's 10 times or more.
So welcome, Rob. I'd love to talk to you about being a CTO today and how that role has changed over the last few years. So briefly, to set the scene, what do you view as the role of a CTO?
Hi, John, and thanks for inviting me on your podcast. So that could be quite a long, broad answer, but I really like the way that someone I know called Anna Shipman articulated it at a presentation for CTO Craft last year, which is it's the intersection of people, process, and technology. And particularly within that, for a CTO, I think it can mean very many different things across those three main areas. And one thing for any CTO is really understanding where their strengths are within those intersections of people, process, and technology, and how they all come together. And ultimately, above that it is a strategic leadership role. And I think particularly within that is understanding that your role in an organization is in the leadership team, that is in your home, and particularly importantly, how you engage well at that kind of leadership level. So I think most importantly, regardless, are the same things that are true and important across any senior leadership role. And particularly that comes into the way you communicate, the way you articulate strategy, the way you are able to then within that bring the wider product and technology organization together around those organizational goals.
Cool, thank you. I was a little bit nervous there when you said people, process, and technology, and there's no mention of business. But I think we came back to it with a strategic element, because one of my big bugbears with the CTO role, and I see this a lot across some of the CTO hiring and a lot of people talk about, is they talk about our CTO is cutting this code, our CTO is managing this low-level team. I'm thinking that's not really a CTO role. That's a senior developer or an architect. Where's the strategy? Where's the dealing with the senior leadership team? Where's the thought about the commercial imperatives, the business, and what we're trying to achieve here? So I think that's key to focus on that, and so often gets missed. Why do you think it is that so many people have that misperception about the CTO role?
Well, I think there's a lot of magic in technology, isn't there? So I think it's a difficult one to answer as much as just throughout my career, technology has always been a fourth order decision. It is an enabler of a business goals. It is not the thing driving it. However, I think a lot of people who have come through technology into leadership roles miss that along the way, particularly those with more of a kind of builder mindset. More interested and fascinated with the technology, which is incredibly fascinating. I think they often get promoted into leadership roles because they're very good at building stuff. And, I don't think it's anybody's particular fault, but I think then for people looking at it from the outside and technology, all of those things are kind of incredibly alluring from the perspective of people that know how to build and manage and maintain software. So you can get the wrong people getting kind of promoted into those positions. And I see it quite a lot where they aren't particularly effective communicators. They're not particularly outcome focused. They do like to be very hands-on and continue to get stuck into the code. And I think for me, this is towards my biases throughout my career and probably playing to my strengths. It's more about the people and the process than it is about the technology. And I think people that are more technology biased are probably more suited to staff plus engineer roles or the kind of IC technical track than necessarily the leadership track. And again, I'm probably biased towards CTO roles, very much more for people best suited to the people and process side, but obviously have a good, strong understanding of the technology side as well, but really are being led by the outcomes that the organization's trying to achieve.
So if you're one of those people who has been promoted because you're the best builder, very technical, very hands-on, and you want to focus on that, and you're now part of a senior leadership team in a startup and maybe struggling with some of these issues, or maybe struggling with some of these issues but not aware that you're struggling. Is there any advice we can give people to how they can recognize they're in that situation and what they can do about it?
Oh, it's a really interesting one. I think a key attribute of good leadership is adaptability, and having the ability to adapt and having awareness of your strengths and weaknesses. And particularly within that, you should already know to some degree, but you're always looking to get feedback from other people within the organization around that kind of thing. But kind of either way, within the intersection of those three sort of core areas of people and process and technology is really thinking about how you organize your leadership team to support you. So if you are more on the technology side of the areas, then really you're looking to make sure that there's someone in your team or your leadership team who has strengths around the people side, perhaps, or the process side. And the context is different in every organization, but typically, if I'm coming into a new engagement or in previous roles I've had, I'm trying to identify where those areas are and make sure that I've got real strengths where I need them. So yeah, particularly for me, when I have had permanent leadership teams in large organizations, it's making sure I've got real strengths in what you might call a staff plus engineer or principal engineers and architects to support me around that.
So coming back to that perhaps newly promoted CTO who maybe has some gaps, might not be aware of them, perhaps I could sum that advice then up as they should go and seek that feedback, because they might not be aware that they're missing these skills. They might not be aware that their role is not just build the coolest technology or build the best technology. It's deliver on the business outcomes, focus on the goals. It's collaborate with your first team. And your first team is now the senior leadership team. It's not the technology team. So perhaps the real focus we can add to them is go and ask for feedback. Talk to the CFO, the CEO, CMO, whoever other executives are on your first team, and get their feedback. It's like, what am I doing well? What am I not doing well? How can I collaborate better with you? How do you like to work? How do you want to work with me? Those kind of things. Anything you'd add to that, Rob?
Yeah, well, having really strong relationships across your first team is incredibly important. I think for me, looking back at my leadership career, I learned somewhat the hard way earlier on, where you got some late feedback, where the blood drains from your face as you get all of this kind of in one go. But I think key for me, and then this is another, because you can't always get it all. You can't expect everybody to be perfect and constructive and being honest and open with you. Definitely make sure you're being very proactive around those things, but a key thing is your resilience. So when I got that very difficult situation, and I've had many throughout my career like this, is learning from failure, and how you respond in those situations. And resilience for me is how you respond. It's not how you protect and insulate yourself from difficult situations. So there's two paths you can go down. I've had them as a software engineer, and I found out I wasn't a very good one at one point. I found it about like my first leadership position. You can be defensive. You can try and give all the reasons why it's not your fault or it's someone else's problem, or you can be incredibly proactive, as I did in that example I'm giving, where I actually went round and spoke to every single person in the leadership team, got all their feedback, figured out what I was going to do in that situation, played it back to my CEO, and we moved on. And that was incredibly valuable for me. I feel like probably some of my biggest failures have also been the points in my career when I have grown the most.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, doing a good job, you don't necessarily learn much from that and have opportunities of growth. Making a complete pig's ear of everything, messing it all up, that's when you've got a chance to reflect and go, well, that didn't work. What could we do better? Coming back to what you said there, it's perfectly natural, though, isn't it, to be defensive? We shouldn't feel bad about that. We should perhaps recognize that it's not constructive and not helping, but it's human, it's normal. Again, if we have been defensive, perhaps recognize it as a normal human reaction, reflect on it, sleep on it, and maybe go back the next day and apologize on it, and then take the next steps, which I'd suggest the next steps are asking for some coaching, either from your CEO or from a colleague on the senior leadership team, if anyone feels right and appropriate, or alternatively seek some from outside the organisation. What are your thoughts on that, Rob?
Yeah, well, I typically like to personally make sure I've got a really strong network and peer group. I have benefited so much from being able to go and cry on someone's shoulder throughout my career. People that I've had long relationships with throughout their time, to get a different perspective and a different point of view. I've also really benefited from coaching on multiple occasions. I think the interesting thing with coaching, with what I found, is sometimes there's a connection and it works, and sometimes it doesn't. So don't take that first foray into coaching where you found that the mentor or the coach hasn't quite worked as necessarily a bad sign. There needs to be a connection there around it. Something incredibly powerful for me throughout my career has, I remember the days of going to the Extreme Tuesday Club in London on Tuesdays, and it was just a moaning shop for everybody. But it was fantastic as we're able to kind of share our experiences and talk through those problems. And more recently, I've had the opportunity to replicate that at a leadership level. So myself and someone called Dave McCarroll run the CTO Craft Manchester Mixer, which is basically a very informal get together of CTOs and other technology leaders coming together in the pub informally, sharing our pain, sharing our experiences and learning from each other.
So you're giving away our age there, mentioning Extreme Tuesday. That was many years ago, surely.
Yeah, it's still going.
It's still going, is it? Wow. Yeah. It's a long time since I've heard anyone mention it. Okay, so on coaching, I wanted to pick up on that. As you said, the first person you speak to might not be the right fit. I think the other thing that people forget with coaching is even the coach that is the right fit, they might be the right fit for that context, for that thing that you're working through. And you can have more than one coach. You can get different coaches at different times. So maybe if you're working on communication, one person will be particularly great. If you're working on strategy and how to present a business case, maybe somebody else is better, and so on. Cool. So I want to pivot a little bit now, and we talked about the CTO role and some of the things that we should think about. Coming back to that strategic element, there's a big topic at the moment around AI and people having a FOMO, a lot of fear. Are we missing out? Are we missing out on how we could develop better? Are we missing out on what we should put in our product? How do you approach that as a CTO and trying to figure out, should we be having AI in the product? Should we be using AI to build a product?
Yeah, well, look, it's a really interesting one. I think the place I would first start is with having now been in this industry for over 25 years, I've seen quite a few paradigm shifts throughout this time. And as much as this is a pretty big one from the perspective of for software engineering in particular, that really is, and we are going through an incredibly disruptive period right now, but they still follow the same patterns regardless. And particularly looking at a lot of those paradigm shifts and new technologies and practices where you get a lot of people really diving in very early, jumping on these things, only to find out later on that they've approached it in the wrong way and not really understood things well enough, or there's just still emerging and the sand is moving under your feet. And then, within them, there's real productivity benefits to be had. And I think probably a very interesting dynamic that we have now, which is perhaps different from these other technology paradigm shifts that have gone on, is a lot of the ones in the technology and engineering space. It's often the CTO or the technology leaders really having to kind of explain and advocate to your CEO and wider leadership team and justify the investment in them. This one is very much, there's a lot of pressure coming the other way now to justify why you are not and why you are not pushing harder when there are all these claims about the capability and what it can do and the potential opportunity. And particularly, you've got CEOs with lots of people in their ears, particularly CEOs just by nature, and this is not a criticism, are hugely competitive people. They have their own peer groups and they speak to each other, what each other up to. And then it's like, well, why aren't we doing this? Probably most similarly was when mobile came around and it was like, oh, we all have to be mobile first now, regardless of whether it's got value or not. So I think that's really interesting. Although at the same time, there looks to be, certainly from a software engineering perspective, real value to be had. However, it's all changing every day, and it is a really difficult landscape to navigate at the moment. I know a lot of CTOs who feel like they are under an enormous amount of pressure, top down, and then I know some CTOs who are incredibly excited and probably doing quite similar. I think it's very hard to predict where it's all going to go at the moment. Probably one of the things that has done well throughout my career is I regularly use the phrase "go with boring common technology." And that is because these things have been battle tested, they're well understood in the industry, there are good practices and paths to follow, it's easy to find people with these kind of skills. That doesn't mean they're old legacy technology. It just means that's generally the best time to use them. AI and Gen AI in all its forms at the moment is neither boring. It's certainly very common. It's all over the place, but it's still very much in an emerging state. Personally, where I think people really need to be focusing most at the moment is still in the exploratory and discovery phase. Really need to be curious around all of these technologies and learning. And really, it's about identifying when the right moment is to strike and invest. Now, I think within all of this, it's very fractal and it's not necessarily do nothing. But it's still incredibly exploratory. There are lots of risks. There are lots of potential things that could go in different directions. And it's about how you manage that. And I think particularly how you support your organization going through that process to make sure there are really good guardrails in place to support people. So you really want to foster that innovation and curiosity and make sure that there is time available to do so. But you want to make sure it's being done in a safe way, and also where those learnings are coming back into the organization and helping you to adjust your technology strategy, your processes, really thinking about the security and cost side of these things as well, and the potential risks and trade-offs. There are always risks and trade-offs that go with it all. So in that respect, you don't really treat it any different to any other technology shift or paradigm that has come before. I could probably go on at length, and there may be a bit of repetition in here that certainly everything that looks to be very evident through this paradigm shift we're going through now is all the best practices that have actually been around for a very long time remain true through all of this. As much as people might tell you otherwise and saying things don't matter anymore, it does all still seem to. So, for example, with software engineering, the best practices that have come through what might be the XP and Agile movement really, and DevOps movement, if we say that as well, are even more important today than they ever have been.
Cool. As you mentioned some of that, Rob, I was just thinking disruptions and paradigm shifts we've had over the last 30 or so years. I wrote a list of things, and you've mentioned a couple more as you go in there that I even forgot to list. And it's quite a lot. We had expert systems were going to change the world, and then fuzzy logic was going to change the world. Then we had the internet and .com. We had this mobile and cloud and DevOps and Agile and now LLMs. That's, like one every 2 years, roughly, of these paradigm shifts that we've had over the last 30 years nearly. It's getting quite a lot. And as you say, there's a pattern that the only constantly here is change. We're constantly having these new paradigms. Perhaps we need to do less knee-jerk and more reflection that we're still fundamentally building software. We're still writing in programming languages. Our computers still have the same fundamental architecture that they had 40 years ago. We're still building on, most of us, on x86 or similar, or a RISC chip like an ARM. There's been a lot of change, but there's also a lot of constant. And the constant should really be how we assess these, how we approach them, how we leverage the lessons from the past. And it seems that a lot of times we keep rediscovering these things rather than leveraging that. So really playing back to the CTO hat, how do you manage as a CTO the risk of this knee-jerk reaction of we've got to rush over and put AI in the product? Because as you say, a lot of time as CTO, we have to push that. This is more like the .com period where everyone's coming along, so we have to have a website. Or the mobile period that you mentioned where everyone's coming along and say, we have to have a mobile app now. How do you put the guardrails in your place that you mentioned? How do you deal with this? How do you push back on the business of, yes, we want to look at this, we've got to investigate it, but maybe a little bit calmer, not just rush in blindly?
I think that the practice that has held me up most effectively throughout my career has been proved by doing. So rather than getting stuck in debate or risk being defensive, is to what is the quickest way that we can test a hypothesis or an assumption. So giving an example, an interesting one from a big enterprise organization I was at, maybe 10 years ago now. The CEO was very adamant that a mobile app was required. And to the point where it created quite a lot of political friction and some changes in high-level leadership, which was very interesting. However, it ended up landing on my plate. And really it was then, right, okay, let's go and build a mobile app as quickly as we possibly can to go and prove whether there is value, which we did. We did it quicker than we were given and spent less money than we budgeted. And so rather than debating it, we built it and we proved that there wasn't a need for a mobile app. And I think it was probably not really small. This wasn't like a couple of weeks. It still took a couple of months. This was a big enterprise organization. But I just see this at every level through the organization. So, you know, developers will argue black and white for one approach or one technology over the other. So it's really about how can you do proof of concepts and spikes as quickly as you can to test something. What's important within all of that is being very clear about what you are trying to test and what is the problem that you are trying to solve. And typically then, time boxed experiments to go and find that out as quickly as possible, rather than, you know, getting caught spending a lot of time investing a lot of money to find out that something won't work.
I love that approach, Rob. And when I talk to people about starting a business, that's something I always push, because I started my first business in 2001, just after the dot-com boom, as we went into a telco crash. So a lot of people get made redundant, taking redundancy money, going, I'm going to start a .com. I saw a lot of those people then go bankrupt and lose their house. And it was always because they run after the hype and they didn't validate their idea. They went and spent 100K or 200K of their savings building some website without validating that anybody actually wanted this thing or that anyone would buy that way. So I'm very much now, I push people, what's your MVP? And my benchmark for their MVP, if you're starting a business, is you can do it and launch it in 2 weeks and it costs you less than $100. And I make that very, very tight so nobody loses their shirt. And a lot of people push back on that, say it's ridiculous, you can't do that. But my point is, find a way, because you can normally find a way of validating it, even if it's just picking up the phone, saying to somebody, this is what I do, will you sign a check? That doesn't cost you much, but you get that validation and you don't lose your house from it. Bringing that back then to AI, are you or have you done any trials with AI in any of your roles recently, either to incorporate it into a product or to leverage it? And what results are you seeing then?
I think it's very context specific, and I think that's a lot of the things that we're learning. Obviously, the landscape is changing very quickly, and this is part of the challenge, because what was true or not true yesterday, you know, by the release of the next model or the new capability is now redundant. I think that's part of what makes it quite hard. Yeah, look, it's a very interesting space. I think it's a jagged frontier, as I've seen a lot of people talk about, which is that, you know, these Gen AI and LLMs can be very good at some things and very bad at others. And the difficulty of getting what is a proof of concept into production is continuing to prove very hard. I think it is the common thing in technology of it's quite easy to get to the first 70 or 80%, but the last mile continues to prove the hardest around all of these things. And to be honest, where I've had the most success tends to be actually more classic ML than it is using Gen AI. Where I found Gen AI tends to work best is where it is not business critical at the moment. Very good at being able to take documents, get sentiment, get information out of documents very quickly. If you have a system that relies on some form of documents very well, it is good is where there's very much a human in the loop, and how it can support in some activities, particularly sort of more task based. And then I think the sort of natural language interface, so typically things like chatbots and things like that. But I think the real risk with all of this is the solution looking for the problem. And yes. The bigger problem comes back to trying to find a use for this technology rather than the other way round. And I think that's where a lot of the industry is caught up at the moment still. There are not yet, and I keep looking, anything I've seen that and look, this may well change, right? So I'm not trying to be skeptical about it. I am regularly searching for where generative AI in businesses has had some real substantial transformative impact. and I've yet to see any. I think there are cases where there are certainly proving to help and improve in organizations and change the nature of the role. But as much as the hype is all talking about, as yet we're not seeing it. 2025 was supposed to be the year of autonomous agents. I don't think I've seen anything particularly to say that's materially become the case. And I think there's lots of questions and open questions that continue to be there about, challenges that have still not been solved with all of that. I think the most interesting area is software engineering, right? It is definitely hugely disruptive and changing the landscape here, I think, more than in any other industry in how we build, deploy, maintain software.
Yeah, so I think software engineering seems to be the place where it's claimed to have had the most transformative impact. But those claims range from it's rubbish, it produces terrible code, it doesn't work, to I can do the work of 10 people in an hour and build what they would have spent a year doing. I think both of those extremes are likely to be proved entirely wrong. And as always with these things, the real answer is somewhere in the middle. I found it incredibly useful for some things. I love using it for coding front ends because, apologies to all the front end developers, I passionately hate doing front end stuff. I have no interest in improving my CSS skills from where they were in 1999, 2000, whenever it was that CS first came out. CSS, sorry. So there's wild claims on that. I think the big problem that I see against that, and the big risk I think about with this, that I think all executives should be considering, is if the only genuinely transformative place we can point to is software engineering, that doesn't justify the crazy amount of money that's gone into it. That doesn't justify the valuations of OpenAI and Anthropic and so on. There isn't a big enough market to sell their tools profitably to replace software engineers. What are your thoughts on that? And how do you manage that risk as a CTO, Rob?
Yeah, well, I think that is probably the bigger problem right now and the potential consequences of it. As much as the potential with software engineering could be brilliant, we still don't, I think transformative, yes, but what's that going to result in from business benefits, I still think is a big open question. We are still learning, and I'm definitely not saying that there won't be, but it's really early days to know which direction it's going to go in and how organizations are going to respond to it, because typically with paradigm shifts similar to Gen AI throughout software engineering, it's resulted in more software engineers, more software. It doesn't, and also within all of that, we just, even through the history of technology, information technology, it's not resulted in massive GDP growth in organizations. It's not resulted in a massive impact on economies. It's certainly changed the world in the way we work and the way we communicate and many other things. But I learned about the solo paradox a few months ago as I was curious around all of these things. And it highlights that, regardless of internet and everything else coming along over the last sort of 30 years, we've not seen this new explosive growth in economies or kind of other things that have happened. But yeah, the valuations, the cost, the investment that's going into all of this is gargantuan. And that money's got to come back somewhere. And the one I'm probably most worried about is the one we were chatting a bit on LinkedIn about the other day, is that there is heavy subsidization going on at the moment. So if it's costing you $200 a month for a Claude Max subscription right now, when that potentially comes home to roost, what is the actual, when I'm using core code and using my subscription, I'm often going on to sort of CC usage and other sites to kind of and like, even then, right, I am rinsing through and spending more money than my subscription allows in like a very short period of time. It just seems to be that they're quite tolerant about it. But that's just on their API costs as they're charging them right now. But if it ends up costing 5 times as much, or as someone was speculating in that podcast you shared, that it could be 50 times as much, then that utterly changes things. And the worry at the moment is we're all getting really invested. And I don't know a developer. Oh, by the way, for anybody that thinks like developers are being skeptical and negative about this, yes, I think, maybe there are some that aren't, but the vast majority of software engineers are heavily playing with this stuff all the time. Is, well, now we're all like stuck in this, and now we're using this way. And now suddenly what happens if a $200 Claude code subscription turns out to be $1,000 or even $5,000 a month? It's one thing getting your CFO to approve a $200 subscription license for all your developers. It's another thing if it's 10 times or more. Yeah, that's a real worry.
Yeah, I've seen several people claiming that they'd happily pay 10 grand a month for it because they see the value. But they're working in Silicon Valley companies in Silicon Valley with software engineer salaries that lend to several $100,000 a year. That's not realistic for most of the market here in the UK. $10,000 a month would probably be in the top 20th percentile, I guess, for software engineering salaries right across the UK. So for most people, it would be cheaper to hire a person than use it, or most organisations in the UK. I think it would be cheaper to hire a person than to use AI for that. So I think that's a real risk that executives need to bear in mind. We obviously have quite different audiences and different people we speak to, because I see a whole range from people who are absolutely not using it to people who are using it daily and heavily invested in learning about it. And I honestly struggle when I try and work out, is this claim that 90% of software is written by AI or will be written by AI within the next 6 months or whatever number we put on it? I really struggle to work out how realistic or unrealistic that is, because when I talk to small startups and small organizations, they generally have more flexibility. They're using the latest thing. They can investigate those tools, and they are more heavily invested in it. When I talk to people working in, should we say, some scale-ups, they're exploring it, but they're being pushed more to the enterprise solution. So they'll all start with GitHub Copilot and mostly frustrated with it. Then when I talk to people in the more traditional enterprise area, they're like, yeah, come on, get realistic. It'll be 20 years before that gets approved and filters through. So I struggle with this idea that it's going to be adopted right across the industry so quickly. There are still companies that I know that run their own data centers and they haven't gone to the cloud because of various reasons. Then there's ones like 37 Signals that come back out of the clouds. There's all levels of that. So it will be interesting to see. So I know you said you've seen a lot of people adopting it and a lot of people playing with it. What are your thoughts on when or if we'll get to that majority of the code being written by AI?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the first way to phrase it is when will the majority of software be able to be a code, let's say, be generated? That's very different from adoption. And considering looking at history where there have been modern, well-proven, boring common best practices that have been around for a very long time now, and seeing how very few of the industry has adopted them, then you would suggest that it's going to be a very long time. And particularly big, larger organizations, which are low risk, have a lot of bureaucracy, just always seem to be a very long way behind the curve. And by the time they've got to this point, everybody has moved on to the other one. And this is also what Solo was saying in his productivity paradox, is just how long it takes for things to get embedded. So when the first kind of spreadsheet software came along, to the point where it actually started being able to be practically useful in organizations, took a very long time. And it wasn't because the technology was bad. It was pretty good from kind of early on. It was just how long it took organizations to adapt to those practices. One thing I still see, which is really interesting, is as much as we've moved to a lot of cloud-based software and using things like, Google Workspace and Teams and other ones, is how people just have not got used to the idea of collaborating on documentation and still send copies of documents to each other. And this stuff has been around for, I don't know now, like 15 years, and are still not taking advantage of these kind of things. So yeah, it's going to be a very, very long time before 90% of the world's software is going to be generated by AI coding tools. And there will be places that won't. And probably within that time, you'll have the David Hannemeyer Hansons who will go, right, we've gone into the cloud and now we're going back the other way. So, no doubt in like 10 years, they'll be like, right, we're moving away completely from Gen AI coding and back to artisanal code. Anybody that says they can confidently predict where any of this is going to go, I just, they don't.
I think the only thing I'd confidently say is I have no idea.
Yeah.
It will surprise me. The spreadsheet is a great analogy there, because it still seems on a weekly basis, I say to somebody, well, that'd be really easy to model in a spreadsheet. And I'm like, well, you can do that in spreadsheets? And I'm like, seriously? We've had spreadsheets as a great tool for managing businesses and modeling things that you want for absolutely decades. But I've still come across senior leadership teams that haven't thought about that. Nobody's shown them how to use a spreadsheet. They're not aware of the capabilities. So it's an eye-opener every time you see that, and a reminder that some of this technology takes a long time to be adopted. Cool. Final question then. I've taken up all your time, Rob. When you flipping the hat to the other side, maybe working for an investor or coming in externally for a management team to assess the technology and refigure out their strategy, when you come in and do tech DD or tech assessment for a company, what are the things that you're really looking for to see from a team to better say, this team is in trouble or this team is doing great, go with it?
Yeah, well, anybody that's familiar with doing these exercises will know that there's some sort of pretty standard areas that you'll go through. So product strategy, product management, the practices that you have around that, then your team and how it's structured and whether you have the right skills and capabilities in place, particularly whether you've got key person dependencies and how your leadership structure is organized for effectiveness, then into the delivery practices, how you get from an idea to working software in production, then through your architecture and tech stack, your technical debt, your infrastructure that's supporting it all. And obviously then there's a big lens on security and data security, and regulation and compliance and all those things that come as part of it. So that regardless of whether it's like a discovery with what potentially is a new client as a product and technology leadership consultant or investor due diligence, these things tend to be the same. What is important is where is the organization now and where does it want to go? So anytime I'm generally being brought in, it is because these are organizations that are going through change. Now that change might be, we're terrible at delivering software, we really need some help, or the things I particularly enjoy is, this is a stage of growth for the organization. We're here now. How do we get there? And that's obviously the lens that particularly comes in when it's investor due diligence, because obviously it's going through investment rounds. So that really is then, okay, what are your foundations like for that next stage? And particularly for investors, they really want to know, is this an organization that has that capability to be able to deliver on the things that they are saying they need to deliver to get to that next level of scale and growth? And I'd probably say what I always find are the biggest areas is maybe this is a bit biased towards me, but it really is your people more than anything else, and it's your capability that you have in the organization and the way you're set up for success in that sense. The technology is a manifestation of everything upstream. If you've got crappy software, it is probably because you've not got a clear direction, you're changing priorities very frequently, you've not invested in the right skills in the organization to make sure that they are being able to implement the best practices. But you can have the best engineers with all that best practice, but if you're not putting them in a position to support them to do so, then they aren't going to be able to. And quickly rushing things out that haven't been kind of built properly just to reach a deadline.
Yeah, it's always a people problem, isn't it?
Yes. Well, until AI comes and just does it all, of course.
Even then, I don't believe, or at least not with any generative AI, because you can take however smart you believe generative AI is. The reality is it sits there and does nothing until we communicate with it. It's waiting for us to prompt it to do something. So it's still down to us to put that sensible prompt in. And if we put in garbage, we're going to get garbage out. If we put in, as you say, clear requirements, clear direction, and we have sensible goals and sensible deadlines, we're going to be heading in the right direction. Cool. Any final thoughts that you'd like to share up?
Probably, I think I'd come back to I think software engineering particularly is in a hot mess right now with everything going on. And I think for me, the stuff that I'd really encourage people to look at is what has been around and established and known around technology and delivering technology now for a very long time. We're talking many decades. We're talking 50 years or so. Things that the first people that were working with programming were finding out back in the 1950s. And particularly I've been getting back into the work of Fred Brooks recently, and the Mythical Man Month, and things like that. And the interesting thing through every paradigm shift in technology is the people that were identifying these things and saying them many, many years ago have remained true through all of them. Of course, someone's going to, comment on the video and say, well, this time it's different. Maybe that'll be the case, right? I'm not one that's going to confidently predict the future or say where it's going to go. But if you look at that trajectory from the first programmers through to people like Fred Brooks, well, if you can go back even further, to be honest, I mean, around the time that programming started, sort of post-war period was also the time that people like W. Edwards Deming were going into Japan, resulting in things like the Toyota production system and lean manufacturing and those lean methodologies. There's a thread you can pull through all of that to the early days of things like Scrum and XP and into the Agile movement, all kind of saying very similar things about what holds true. And they all continue to look incredibly relevant today. And I think probably what makes me feel old is when I go on LinkedIn and see people saying things about how things are going to change and how incredible this is, but in ways that suggest that they have not seen or heard any of those things that have come before. And it just feels like we're going to continue to be learning the hard way around all of this stuff. Probably one of my favorite things continues to be the Agile Manifesto. I look at that now. That was a document, I can't remember, when was that? Sort of 2009, I can't remember.
No, much before that, more like 2002, I think.
Yeah, all right, okay, so it's like 25 years old, and you look at that and look at how the things remain true, and then you look at how things like Scrum came along and got misinterpreted and bastardized into what we see as then people calling Agile is dead, but what they mean, no, that misinterpretation of what that intent was. And we look at these grand claims around how, oh, wow, now I can write code 10 times faster, without understanding that things like that kind of coding speed hasn't been the bottleneck as far back as I can look. And actually, it's the upstream constraints and the downstream constraints that have been the bigger problems, even to when people were doing like batch programming and having to write punch cards and things like that. I think probably it's been on my mind recently, and I'll probably write an article or post around it sometime. I think that the biggest discipline and understanding that's going to become essential now, not that it wasn't before, is going to be around systems thinking, and really about understanding end to end how value flows through an organization, the value streams, and being able to identify that end to end, particularly for like software delivery, and where your bottlenecks really lie, to be able to get the most out of these new technologies. And certainly everything I see to date, and again, it might change tomorrow, is the teams that are proving and the people that are proving to have the most impact and benefit from AI software engineering are the ones that are already well versed and really understand and know well those practices, and the high performing teams that have those cultures where they've got highly automated build and deployment, but also particularly the product thinking and the product mindset. And developers, I think my probably biggest worry at the moment is not that they're going to be replaced and there'll be a lot less software engineering roles in the future. I don't think anybody can predict that either way at the moment, but is what I see is just a lot of the industry where software developers are really not more than just taking tickets off Jira boards, coding, not really caring about the business and the outcomes, chucking things over the wall to kind of test teams, not well versed in good software coding practices and code quality. I think they're at real risk. I think they're going to get exposed.
Yeah, I think so. If we take some points away from that, if you haven't already and you're listening to this, read Peopleware. Read Fred Brooks' Mythical Man Month. They are old now. I mean, Mythical Man Month was the mid-70s, was it? So I'm guessing they're older than both of us, Rob. Still highly relevant, still very on point, still a lot of good advice in there, and it's still all about the people. The technology has changed, but people are still fundamentally the same. We still need to eat, we still need to drink, we're still emotional, we still make emotional decisions, we're still not perfectly rational. The other point in that, and I highlight this too, is I've had a lot of success using AI to build software. I've had a lot of failures. The failures are when I just try and go and build me X, and it's a vague description. The successes are when I do the things that I've always recognized as good software engineering. So I give it a clear set of requirements. I provide those requirements in a way of test cases or actual test code to execute. I iterate on small tasks and small batches of work. So all the good things that, we come back to the Agile Manifesto and extreme programming, which I'm a huge fan of. And I am going to go out on a limb and make a prediction. Well, I think the economy and the world situation is a little bit difficult at the moment, the end of zero interest rates and so on. So hiring is difficult. People are finding it difficult to get jobs. I think AI slop is meaning a lot of people get inundated with job applications from people who are inappropriate because it's very easy to apply and send stuff. So I think getting hired at the moment is very hard, but I think that as all this pans out, the demand for software is only ever going to go up for the foreseeable future. If maybe not in the next year or two, but in the next 10, 20 years, I see it going up. When I look around, we're both in the UK, there's still so much government stuff that's not properly digitized, that's still relying on paper forms. If there are more software engineers and it's cheaper and easier to do software, that digitization will happen quicker. There are still so many small businesses that are relying on paper forms, poor processes, got very laborious manual work that could all be automated and their staff could do something of more value. If software becomes cheaper and quicker to do, that becomes more accessible. And again, in every company I've worked for, from 2 people to 200,000 people, there's always been more projects than we could staff.
Oh, yeah.
So if I can now take a team of 20 and do that work with 2 people, I would be, as a manager in a big enterprise, going, well, I'm going to have 20 teams of 2 people, and all that 19 projects that we haven't been able to touch, we'll get on with those because, we'll run that experiment, we'll find out if it's valuable, and then we'll bin it, we'll move on to the next one, or we'll find it's valuable, and we'll scale it up. So I think as things settle down and as the market gets less crazy and we get past that FOMO, I see growth of the industry.
A bold prediction, but not an unreasonable one. There's concepts like Jevons paradox and the red-green waste that people talk about, and particularly with every big paradigm shift, again, if you look historically through software engineering, that has been the result. So it wouldn't be unreasonable to say that something similar will happen now. I think that the interesting and difficult thing within all of that, and this has been the same through, outside of software engineering, but any sort of big change, if you look at things like the Industrial Revolution and other ones, and when technology first came in, is it can still be difficult through that transition. The skills that were relevant yesterday are no longer relevant today. And as much as there is opportunity for people, that there is risk around it. And that can be a difficult period to go through, regardless of whether the outcome might be positive at the end. My strong encouragement would be for anybody involved in this industry, and the thing that has stood me most well throughout my career growth is staying curious and exploring it. And it is particularly because software engineering that has never stood still throughout my career, that has made it particularly fascinating. So probably one of the first people, not the first people to subscribe, but I've had a ChatGPT subscription now for however long since ChatGPT 4 came out. And as much as some of my posts on LinkedIn and other places might to some people come across as maybe more on the skeptical side, my goodness, I'm probably, I am a power user is the way I would put it. It's just that probably I'm anti-hype. Let's put it that way. But I think it's a fascinating opportunity. It's really about how you grasp it. When I looked at DevOps, when that came along, and cloud, you had the grumpy sysadmins that were stalwarts to cloud and some of the DevOps practices that came along. And then there were the ones that leapt on it. And the ones that leapt on it suddenly were being paid twice as much than a system admin was being paid before. So, there's all these brilliant opportunities, and they're really just out there for everybody to take advantage of.
Yeah, I'm with you there. I put a comment on somebody's post the other day that I'm pro AI. In fact, AI is why I got into software engineering and why I learned to program when I was 9 years old, many, many years ago. But I'm anti-hype. I find the hype quite annoying and frustrating. Enjoy using the technology, and I've enjoyed building software for AI for most of my career. Has touched on bits of it. Okay, excellent. I think we have covered all the topics that I wanted to cover today, Rob, and I'm conscious of your time, so thank you very much. If anyone wants to reach out and get in contact with you, what's the best way for them to reach out and get a hold of you?
I'm on LinkedIn is probably a good place to start. I'm a prolific poster, I have lots of thoughts in my head that I need to get out. So I'm an independent consultant. Pragmatic Partners is the name of my company that I work through, but it's just kind of a bit of a holding page website more than anything else. I'm on Blue Sky, but yeah, maybe LinkedIn and Blue Sky are the best places to get in touch. I love talking about this stuff. John, I met you, I think, through LinkedIn. I think we've been talking to each other on LinkedIn now for a couple of years. So it's fantastic to actually get to meet you. And I've really enjoyed the conversation, and I look forward to doing so again online. And I think particularly for me, community has been the thing that I've loved the most around this industry. I've got the most from in this industry as well. So yeah, LinkedIn's probably the best place.
Right. Thank you very much, Rob. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you, John. Likewise.
I hope you enjoyed that episode of Coding Chats. If you did, please like and subscribe. And feel free to check out these other videos on a similar topic.